Top U.S. officials say they're worried that the Chinese government could soon send military or financial aid to Russia to help Putin's war on Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. The Biden administration has already promised to punish China if it does, a warning President Biden repeated during a call with China's President Xi Jinping this morning, according to the White House. CNN's Caitlin Collins reports now from the White House on what else the two leaders discussed in their nearly 2-hour discussion today.
For an hour and 50 minutes today, President Biden spoke to Chinese President Xi Jinping as he seeks to deter him from bailing out Russia.
China needs to stand on the right side of history. It needs to ensure that it does not backfill financially or in any other way sanctions that have been imposed upon Russia.
He also conveyed and described the implications and consequences if China provides material support to Russia.
Biden hoping to persuade the Chinese leader to distance himself from President Putin and find out whether China plans to answer Russia's request for desperately needed military equipment.
What's critical now is for every nation all over the world to call on Vladimir Putin to end this horrendous war of choice, this war of carnage. That's where we are.
China has refused to call the invasion an invasion or condemn Putin for brutalizing a sovereign country. Today, Biden warned Xi of the implications and consequences if China provides material support to Russia as it conducts brutal attacks against Ukrainian cities and civilians. Chinese state media says President Xi told President Biden that conflict isn't in anyone's interest and, quote, the Ukraine crisis is something we don't want to see. The critical conversation coming as top U.S. officials are warning that Russia is spreading more lies, including ones that have been amplified by Chinese state media.
This meeting and these lies are designed for one purpose and one purpose alone: deflect responsibility for Russia's war of choice and the humanitarian catastrophe it has caused.
As the U.S. plans to send $800 million more in military aid to Ukraine, Russia's foreign minister is claiming they'll view any shipments of weapons as a, quote, legitimate target. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says that Russia will view any weapons shipments into Ukraine as, quote, legitimate targets. What is the president's response to that comment?
Well, that's a threat that he has made before. We will watch closely if they follow up on that threat.
As the U.S. tries to increase the pressure on Putin, top officials are making clear their goal is not to oust him from office.
Does the United States support regime change in Russia?
That is not what we are about. We are not. This is a decision for the people of Russia.
Now, Jake, despite the fact that President Biden spoke to President Xi for nearly 2 hours this morning, the White House says they are still concerned that China might answer that request from Russia for more military equipment and say they'll be watching closely to see what China does going forward.
All right. We have that concern. The president detailed what the implications and consequences would be if China provides material support to Russia as it conducts brutal attacks against Ukrainian cities and civilians. And obviously that is something we will be watching and the world will be watching.
So that concern hasn't gone away following the call?
Obviously actions are a key part of what we'll be watching.
And Jake, one other thing to note, we asked the White House if President Xi referred to this as an invasion during this call with President Biden, given so far he has not called it one publicly. They declined to say, Jake.
All right, Caitlin Collins at the White House, thank you so much. Joining us now to discuss Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He's on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. You just heard Press Secretary Jen Psaki say, even after that nearly 2-hour call between President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, that the White House remains concerned that China is going to help Russia in its war on Ukraine, either economically or militarily. Do you think China is going to actually do that?
Well, Jake, first, it's good to be with you. I think President Biden underscored the point that China needs to be on the right side of history. Any country that assists Mr. Putin in what he's doing has accountability for these atrocities. And I think President Biden made that very clear. I would hope that China wants to be on the right side here. The unprovoked attack by Mr. Putin, any support of that will cause consequences and accountability.
You know, I just wonder, the Chinese is an oppressive autocracy. They're currently, according to the U.S. State Department, committing cultural genocide of the Uyghur Muslim minority population. What makes anyone think the Chinese government would care about what side of history they're on?
You know, China does not share our values. We recognize that. Their leadership does not share that, and that's disappointing. But we would hope that their leadership would understand the importance of respecting the sovereignty of a state, and that what Mr. Putin is doing violates every international norm in regards to sovereignty. And China, I believe, believes that we need to respect the sovereignty of its own country and of other countries. So I would hope that the leadership would recognize that Mr. Putin crossed a line that no one wants to be on what he's doing on and facilitating what he's doing.
When explain to our viewers why they would think that China, considering what it has done in Tibet and Hong Kong and Taiwan, why China would have any sort of belief in sovereignty for another country, considering how they behave when it comes to territories, countries that don't want to be Chinese but are being forced to be.
Well, you raise a very valid point, but recognize that China's territorial disputes relate to what they believe is legitimately their country through either the rights of sea or through the historic relationship between Taiwan and mainland China. The issue concerning their domestic population are areas that we believe violate international norms, but they're certainly not sovereignty issues. So I think the sovereignty of a country, even for China, what Russia has done has gone too far, and we hope they understand that. You know, what Mr. Putin did is unprecedented. It's an unprovoked attack against a sovereign nation that was peaceful. I would not think that any legitimate government would want to support that action.
President Zelensky addressed Western leaders in a speech today saying, quote, "We shall call even louder on certain Western leaders and remind them that this will be their moral defeat if Ukraine does not receive the advanced weapons that will save the lives of thousands of our people," unquote. Note there, he's not saying that about the U.S. Maintaining a no-fly zone. He's talking about, you know, he seems to have lowered his request to within where leaders might consider it to be more practical and pragmatic. Is the U.S., is President Biden doing enough to help right now? Should Biden be facilitating Poland's push to get Ukraine these MiG jet fighters?
First, let me tell you President Zelensky's message to the members of Congress and to the American people in the world. What a powerful message. What an incredible leader. I think we all have the utmost respect for his courage and his leadership. Yes, President Biden has delivered. He's delivered defensive weapons that have allowed Ukraine to defend itself. He's delivered the toughest sanctions that are really crippling Mr. Putin and the Russian economy. And more importantly, he's delivered international support, unity globally under the leadership of President Biden. And now we're providing humanitarian assistance in Ukraine and in regards to the refugees. What Mr. Zelensky wants is more, and we all want more. And he wants us to have a staying power. So the House of Representatives passed an important bill yesterday that dealt with trade issues and global Magnitsky to the enablers, in addition to those who commit these atrocities. We want to see that done. President Biden supports that. So I think we need to do more. We got to stay resolved. But President Biden's provided the leadership that has allowed Ukraine to be able to defend itself and has organized unity among the global community.